All right, welcome in, everyone. We're doing a deep dive today, folks, into Can Fin Homes Ltd.
CFHL.
CFHL, right.
Right.
Q3, their fiscal year 25 performance. We've got regulatory filings,
We do.
press releases,
Yeah.
even an investor presentation, all about this, Indian housing finance company.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, putting together a puzzle. On the surface, their growth looks pretty impressive.
It does.
But we got to figure out,
If it's
if it's as solid as it seems, or if there's
yeah, are there cracks beneath the surface?
Yeah, exactly. Are there some cracks there that we need to dig into a little bit?
Exactly. And often those cracks or those potential challenges are where the real insights lie. Anyone can look and see that CFHL's loan assets are up 9%
Yeah,
year over year, hitting, 37,155 crore rupees.
it's a lot of crower.
It is a lot of core. Profits climbing too, 6%, reaching 212 crore. But what's driving those numbers?
Right.
And is it sustainable? That's what we're here to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the specifics. I see here that 77% of their loan portfolio is housing loans.
Right. Pretty standard for a housing finance company.
Yeah, seems pretty standard. But I'm curious about what's going on within that segment. What are some of the things that are happening there?
Well, one of the things that jumps out to me right away is the change in their loan disbursements.
Okay,
They're flat year over year, which,
not bad.
isn't bad on its own,
Right.
but sequentially they're down 21%
Wow.
compared to the previous quarter. So that's a significant drop.
Yeah, that kind of a drop does make you take a second look for sure.
Yeah, it raises some eyebrows.
Yeah, and it seems like the reason for that is not some internal issue. It's actually tied to, the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing here in the press release, it talks about delays in Karnataka
Mm-hmm.
because of this new ICATA,
Yeah,
electronic property records, which makes sense.
makes sense.
If property registrations are stalled, those loans just can't close.
Exactly. It highlights how vulnerable even a company as established as CFHL can be to regulatory changes. Makes you wonder, how much did they anticipate this?
Yeah.
What's their plan to navigate these kinds of hurdles in the future?
Yeah, that's something we'll definitely keep in mind as we keep looking at all this information. But before we get too lost in the what ifs, let's look at a more immediate concern for any lender, really,
Sure.
and that's asset quality.
Right.
Bad loans, they can really sink a ship fast.
They can. And CFHL, it seems like they're sailing pretty smoothly on that front.
Oh, good.
Their gross NPA ratio is steady at 0.92%. Net NPA even lower
Bro.
at 0.50%.
Now, those numbers, I mean, those might not mean much to people just hearing them on their own.
Yeah, on their own, not so much.
But-
But compared to some of their peers, CFHL is performing exceptionally well.
Okay.
They're clearly doing something right when it comes to, borrower selection,
Right.
risk management, all of that.
So that's good news there. But of course, lenders aren't just in the business of avoiding bad loans.
No, of course not.
They need to make money too.
Right.
So how is CFHL's profitability looking?
That's where we see kind of a mixed picture.
Uh-huh.
Their net interest margin. So this is that all-important metric that tells us how much they're profiting from lending activities has shrunk a little bit to 3.73%.
Okay.
It's not a massive decline,
Right.
but in such a competitive market, every basis point counts.
Yeah, it really does. And it's not just the NI, is it? I'm seeing here that their return on assets and their return on equity are also down just a bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes you wonder, are they starting to feel the heat of the competition?
Yeah.
Are they having to lower their rates to attract borrowers?
It's certainly possible. The investor presentation, it doesn't explicitly say that you have to, read between the lines a little bit. But if their profitability is shrinking despite their growth, something's got to be putting pressure on those margins.
Yeah.
And it could be competition. It could be changing interest rates. Maybe it's even a shift in their loan mix towards less profitable products.
Interesting. So that brings us to the question of where is CFHL getting the money to fuel this growth? Funding, right?
Right.
Funding is like the lifeblood of any financial institution.
Absolutely. And CFHL's approach is pretty interesting. They rely heavily on banks for funding. About 60% of their funding mix comes from banks.
Oh.
The rest comes from things like debentures, borrowings from the National Housing Bank, commercial papers. It's a fairly stable mix.
Right.
But, the saying goes, don't put all your eggs in one basket,
Right.
even if it is a seemingly stable basket.
Right. Because what happens if those banks, they tighten up their lending? Could CFHL be left like scrambling for funds?
It's definitely a valid concern. There's no indication that that's going to happen right now.
Yep.
But, it's something to keep in mind. especially considering CFHL's ambitious growth plans. They want to expand, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But can they do it sustainably if they're so reliant on one funding source?
Right.
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, it's like they're on this tightrope walk,
They are.
balancing growth with risk, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of risk, there's also the question of liquidity. Can they, meet their short-term obligations if things start to get a little choppy?
Well, from what we see in the filings, their liquidity coverage ratio is very healthy, 167.17%, well above that regulatory requirement. So
Okay.
that's a good sign. It means they've got a decent cushion to, absorb any short-term shocks.
Okay. So we're seeing they're growing, they're managing their risk,
Yeah.
but they're also facing some of those profitability pressures. What's their game plan here?
Right.
How are they tackling these challenges and, staying ahead of the curve?
Well, they're certainly not standing still. Their investor presentation talks a lot about digital transformation, streamlining their services, automating processes, even implementing a brand new core banking solution. And actually, they've already chosen IBM as the provisional winner of the RFP for that.
Wow, a new core banking system. I mean, that can be a huge
That'd be an undertaking.
but it could be a potential game changer too.
It could, potentially.
Right.
Yes.
So could this be the key to them boosting efficiency, creating a more seamless experience for customers? I mean, what do you think?
It's possible, but we also have to remember that implementing a system like that comes with its own set of risks and costs.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate this transition and if it really delivers those benefits that they're hoping for.
Okay, so they're betting on tech to stay competitive.
Mm.
What else is in their strategic playbook?
Well, they're also focusing on expanding their borrower base through what they call direct sourcing. So this means reaching out to potential customers directly rather than relying on, intermediaries. It's a way to broaden their reach, potentially tap into some underserved markets.
It sounds ambitious.
It does.
It also sounds potentially risky.
It does.
I mean, can they maintain that strong asset quality while attracting, this wider range of borrowers?
It's a question that needs to be answered.
Yeah.
And it actually leads us to another pretty intriguing piece of the puzzle here. The investor presentation, it mentions a trend toward more loans in what they call the 0-10 lakh range,
Okay.
which suggests they might be targeting a bit of a different customer segment, perhaps focusing on more of those affordable housing options.
That is fascinating. Is this like a sign of their commitment to financial inclusion?
Maybe.
Or is this more of a strategic move to tap into, a growing market segment that also may have a higher risk? It seems like we've stumbled on another layer of complexity in CFHL's story here.
Indeed. And this kind of complexity, this is what makes financial analysis so intriguing. We're not just looking at numbers, we're trying to understand the story that those numbers tell,
Right.
the motivations behind the decisions, and, the potential consequences of those decisions.
Yeah. And in this case, the story seems to be one of growth, ambition, and calculated risk-taking.
Yeah.
I mean, CFHL is clearly not afraid to kind of push boundaries, explore new avenues, but whether those avenues lead to that continued success, well, that's a question we're going to have to keep exploring. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the nuances of CFHL's performance.
Right.
We were just talking about this interesting trend, right? CFHL seeming to be making more loans in that 0-10 lakh range.
Right.
It makes you wonder, is this part of a bigger shift in their strategy? Are they purposely going after a whole new customer segment?
It's definitely a possibility. And actually, their investor presentation, it gives us some clues. They really emphasize the importance of their affordable housing loan centers, which cater specifically to customers seeking loans for, lower cost housing. So it does seem like they're actively trying to reach a segment that, might not traditionally have had that easy access to homeownership.
So first-time home buyers,
Perhaps.
people with lower incomes,
Could be.
folks who might have been, overlooked by more traditional lenders. I mean, that's a pretty big shift.
It is.
And it raises a ton of questions, right?
It does.
I mean, is this purely a business decision? Or is there some sort of social impact angle to this as well?
I think it's probably a bit of both. Expanding into new markets,
Yeah.
smart growth strategy. But CFHL, they also talk about their mission of promoting homeownership across India.
Oh, okay.
So they may be aiming for, a win-win here, growing their business while also trying to make a positive impact.
Okay, I like that. But, we can't forget, lending to a new customer segment, it always comes with risks.
Always.
So, I mean, are they equipped to handle this? especially when we think about those profitability pressures that we were talking about earlier.
Well, their investor presentation, it does emphasize their robust due diligence process. They mention things like, UIDI-linked verification, bank account checks, even field verification of employment and property details.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like they're not taking this lightly.
Okay, that is good to hear. But even with, the best risk management practices, things can go wrong. It all comes down to how well they can assess the creditworthiness of these new borrowers. It's a balancing act, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Growth versus risk,
Right.
profitability versus social impact. It's all connected.
Yeah. And it's a balancing act that I feel like is further complicated by some external factors, like interest rates. Everybody's talking about interest rates going up.
Right.
I mean, that could have a huge impact on CFHL, both on the lending side
Yeah,
and the borrowing side.
absolutely. If their borrowing costs increase, they may have to raise rates for customers, right?
Yeah.
Which could make their loans less attractive, especially in this competitive market.
Right.
And, higher rates, they can put a strain on existing borrowers, potentially leading to more defaults. So, yeah, it's a pretty complex web.
Yeah, it really is. And we can't forget about inflation either.
Right, right.
Rising prices, they erode purchasing power, making it tougher for people to repay those loans.
Yeah,
So, I mean, CFHL, they're going to have to keep a really close eye on all those economic indicators and adjust their strategy accordingly.
they will.
It's almost like they're sailing in uncharted waters.
Kinda.
I mean, they've got a solid ship,
They do.
but they really need to be prepared for any storms that might come their way.
A good captain always anticipates the storms. And speaking of being prepared, CFHL, they're also making some pretty interesting moves on the technology front. We've talked about that new core banking system,
Yeah.
but they also highlight all these other digital initiatives in their investor presentation.
Yeah, they're talking about streamlining customer service, automating processes, even offering more services online.
Yeah.
It seems like they're really going all in on digital.
Mm-hmm.
But is this just a way for them to cut costs?
Perhaps.
Or is there a genuine customer-centric approach here?
It's hard to say for sure without actually seeing these initiatives in action, but if they can truly make things easier,
Yeah.
more convenient for customers, it could give them a real competitive edge,
Mm-hmm.
especially with, a younger, more tech-savvy generation entering the housing market.
So we've got tech upgrades, a focus on affordable housing,
Hmm.
and potentially a shift in their target customer. I mean, it all sounds very forward-thinking, but are there any red flags we should be aware of? Anything in all this that makes you go, that's a bit risky?
Well, we've already talked about those risks associated with their funding mix, right?
Yeah.
And their expansion into those new markets.
Yeah.
But there's also the issue of competition.
Oh, right.
The housing finance market is very crowded. There are traditional players, there are new fintech entrants, all vying for a piece of the pie.
Right. So CFHL can't afford to just sit back and get complacent. They've got to keep innovating, keep adapting, and keep finding ways to set themselves apart.
Absolutely. It's a constant race.
Yeah, it really is. And it'll be interesting to see how they navigate all these challenges and capitalize on the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah.
But you know what? There's one more thing I'd like to highlight before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay. What's that?
Their investor presentation mentions their commitment to environmental sustainability. They're talking about green building initiatives, energy-efficient homes, reducing their carbon footprint.
You don't always see financial institutions, kind of leading the charge on sustainability.
No, you don't.
So is this just a marketing ploy, or are they genuinely committed to making a difference?
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure without, looking into their practices a little bit more.
Right.
But, even just mentioning it in their investor presentation is, I think, significant. It shows that they're recognizing that growing importance of sustainability,
Yeah.
from a business perspective,
Uh-huh.
but also, just from a societal perspective.
It is something to keep an eye on. And it actually speaks to, I think, this larger theme that we've been uncovering throughout our deep dive, which is CFHL's commitment to evolution.
Right.
They're not just reacting to changes, they're actively trying to shape the future of their industry.
Yeah, like a chameleon,
Yeah.
changing colors to blend in. Except in this case, they're not just blending in, they're trying to stand out.
Right. They're trying to lead the way.
Yeah, lead the way.
And that spirit of evolution, that willingness to adapt and to innovate, that's crucial in today's rapidly changing world. It's not enough to keep up. You really have to stay ahead of the curve.
So what does this all mean for people who are watching CFHL? Whether they're investors or customers or just, interested observers of the Indian housing finance market.
It means paying attention to the direction that they're heading, not just their current position, right? Look for signs of that evolutionary spirit.
Yeah.
Those moves that signal they're not just reacting, they're anticipating, they're shaping the future.
Like a chess player,
Exactly.
thinking several moves ahead.
Several moves ahead. So for anyone who's interested in CFHL, the question isn't just, are they performing well?
Right.
It's, are they evolving in a way that sets them up for long-term success?
Exactly. And that's, I think, the beauty of a deep dive like this.
Yep.
We don't just give you the answers, we give you the tools and the insights to ask the right questions.
We equip you to do your own detective work,
Exactly.
to draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, because ultimately knowledge is, it's most powerful when it's understood
Yes.
and applied.
And, who knows, maybe in the process of doing that, you'll uncover something we missed.
Yeah.
Some little hidden gem that sheds a whole new light on CFHL's story.
That's the exciting part. There's always more to discover, more to learn. So keep digging, keep questioning, keep that spirit of curiosity alive. And until next time, happy diving.
So we've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we, in our deep dive into CFHL.
We have.
From their financials to their strategic moves. It's clear that they're not afraid of a challenge.
Nope.
But one thing we haven't really talked about directly is what all this means for, for investors. What's the takeaway here?
Well, it's a little tricky, without having specific share price data
Right.
to go off of. But we can speculate a bit, can't we?
Yeah.
I mean, the steady growth, the low NPAs,
Mm.
that's usually pretty attractive to investors who are seeking stability.
But then you have that shrinking NIM, the reliance on bank funding.
Yeah.
Those things might give some investors pause.
Sure.
It's really a classic risk-reward scenario.
Right, like two sides of the same coin. Some investors, they might see those strategic shifts, like the investments in tech, the focus on affordable housing,
Yeah.
as signs of future growth potential.
Right.
Whereas others might be, more focused on those profitability pressures and worry about the long-term sustainability.
Exactly.
So it really comes down to each individual's, investment goals and risk tolerance.
It does.
There's no magic one-size-fits-all answer.
Nope. But I think what this deep dive really highlights is the importance of looking beyond just, the surface level.
Yeah.
Numbers tell a story, but it's up to us to interpret that story, right?
Yeah.
To understand the context, the motivations, those potential pitfalls.
That's what makes this so much more than just like a, dry financial analysis.
Right.
It's like we're detectives, piecing together all these clues to figure out not just, what happened, but why it matters.
And speaking of why it matters, there's a theme that I've noticed kind of emerging throughout the sources that you've provided, something that's not explicitly stated, more of like an undercurrent.
Okay, you've got me hooked. What's the hidden message here?
It's the idea of evolution. CFHL, they're not content to just, stand still. They're adapting to those market shifts. They're embracing new technologies. They're even, kind of redefining their customer base. They're constantly evolving.
Like a chameleon. Right.
Yeah.
Changing colors to blend in with the environment. Except in this case, they're not just blending in.
No, they're not.
They're trying to stand out.
They are. They're trying to lead the way.
Lead the way.
Yeah.
So what does this mean for people who are, watching CHL, whether they're investors or customers or just interested in the Indian housing finance market?
Well, I think it means paying attention to the direction that they're heading, not just their current position. Look for signs of that, evolutionary spirit, the moves that signal that they're not just reacting, they're anticipating, they're shaping the future.
Like a chess player.
Exactly.
Thinking several moves ahead.
That's it. So for anyone who's interested in CFHL, the question isn't just, are they performing well?
Right.
It's, are they evolving in a way that's going to set them up for long-term success?
And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this, isn't it?
I think so.
We don't just give you the answers, we give you the tools, the insights
Yeah.
to ask the right questions.
To do your own detective work.
Exactly.
Draw your own conclusions.
Because ultimately, knowledge it's most powerful when it's understood and applied.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe in the process, you'll uncover something that we missed.
Oh, totally.
Some hidden gem that sheds a whole new light on CFHL's story.
That's the exciting part. There's always more to discover, more to learn. So Keep digging, keep questioning, keep that spirit of curiosity alive. And until next time, happy diving.